We are live. Welcome to Crypto Law TV. I'm John Deaton, the founder and your host. Listen, it's been a long 4 years. In 4 days from today will be the 4th anniversary of the Ripple case, where the SEC filed the case against Ripple, claiming XRP was a security no matter who held it. And one of the issues that evolved in that litigation was something that has become known as ETHgate. What I've done is brought the perfect host for today because of news that just went down yesterday, and that is Tristan Leavitt. We know him as the president of Empower Oversight. For those of you that don't know, well, I'll actually ask Tristan. Tristan, for anyone that's watching this that doesn't know, what is Empower and what's its purpose? Let's first start with that.
Empower Oversight is a nonprofit organization. It was founded by my partner, Jason Foster. He's now the chair of the board. And he and I spent a number of years working together doing congressional investigations. And there were not a lot of outside groups that worked with whistleblowers, that focused on transparency, kind of in the style that we do it, which is sometimes an aggressive style, but we want to make sure whistleblowers are protected. And we also found that, there are a lot of important pieces of information out there to bring to the public. So that's the purpose of Empower Oversight. That's the work we've been engaged in over these past. He again started it. I joined him about 1.5 years ago, but that's been the ride since then.
No, and listen, I remember Jason was interviewed by a different outlet, and I was being called a conspiracy theorist by many people in the industry. Even though I had more Ethereum at the time than I did XRP, even though 80% of my net worth's in Bitcoin, not XRP, and all of that, the key word that you used just now was transparency. I want transparency. And so what started when Jason was interviewed, someone said something critical, and he goes, no, listen, what Deaton was doing, that's what sort of got our attention. And it all started with this timeline, and I'm not going to go through the timeline, but it's basically a timeline that I put out that just laid on X sort of how this all went down, because there was these inside dealings between certain people and Bill Henman that we're going to get to. And so, and that's where it basically came down. We all know, and just so for the record, so everybody out there, 4 years later, not one of those facts that I called indisputable have been disputed, because they're based, right, 100%. And so, again, we just want transparency, but you all, thank God, because your organization, Tristan, really, to me, in the documentary that was just produced, to me, you guys are the star. And the reason I say you're the star of the show is because you bring a legitimacy to this whole process. At the end of the day, people can say, well, Deaton owned XRP, so he's biased, or whatever, or all the other people involved. My understanding is that Empower doesn't own crypto.
Correct.
Right. And that you all, the principals, aren't crypto traders. You don't care which market cap XRP's at, whether it's 5th or number 2 or any of that nonsense. Right. Again, it's a government watchdog that wants transparency by our regulators. And so basically, tell us what you did, which was Empower Oversight sent some FOIAs, right?
Sure. So from the outset, I think to take people back to 2021, right, and kind of the aftermath of, the two components of ETHgate, right? You have Henman's speech, and then later you have, as Clayton's going out the door, the lawsuit against Ripple. And so, that people made a really big fuss about that in 2021, and that's what caught Jason Foster's attention. And so Empower is a new organization. We didn't yet have any whistleblowers to work with, so he started filing some FOIA requests. And pretty quickly, he started to get interesting information from that. So those first FOIA requests in 2021 and 2022, the SEC really pushes back. That's the wrong term. They ignored initially, essentially. And then when they did finally come to them, to kind of the negotiating table, they were playing a lot of games. And so that quickly led to kind of a flurry. Ultimately, now there have been 3 different FOIA lawsuits against the SEC from Empower. but also document productions along the way. And so just the first couple of document productions made clear that there was more information that was really significant to the story. So again, everyone could see the timeline and know that it looked bad. I think what Empower brought to the table was the knowledge that Bill Henman had been told ahead of time when he came to the SEC, you have a direct financial interest in Simpson Thacher. So you cannot participate in any matters that impact their profitability. And, that was a new piece of information that was very significant. The other, in addition to having that, and that was because, to be clear, and maybe, I don't know how many have seen the documentary, and I don't remember if this walks through that carefully there, but he continued to receive compensation from Simpson Thacher with the understanding that he would return at the end of his time at the SEC. So he had a lot of times people will leave and the likelihood that they're going to go back is pretty high, right? But still, it's not set in stone. But his compensation was directly was capped. So he received a set amount that was kind of an estimate, but still he knew that if Simpson Thacher's profitability went up over those 4 years, the money they made, when he returns there as a partner, he would benefit from that. And so that, to the point that that has been out there about his communications, there's just all these steps that he took that really, appeared to certainly violate the appearance of a conflict of interest. And again, depending on some of the facts, and we'll talk about the Inspector General looking at that right now, but that may in fact have violated the criminal conflict of interest statute. But so that's how we started getting some of this information from these FOIA productions. And ultimately, that was what motivated Jason when he got some of this information to say, hey, just on these facts alone, the Inspector General should be looking at this. This isn't just a complaint from a bunch of people online. This is something where the SEC ethics attorney said, here's what you need to do. And he blatantly disregarded it. And
summarize for the people out there, and listen, for over a year, because I was the first person to actually publicize Bill Henman's financial disclosures, which showed that he was not retired. He was an ongoing profit-sharing partner with the firm and Simpson Thacher. And Simpson Thacher had business before the SEC, such as they were bringing the Canaan IPO to market, which basically produced Ethereum mining equipment when Ethereum was a proof of work protocol, not a proof of stake. And they had some substantial things before the SEC. And I just said, hey, I'm not going to say this guy violated the statute. But then, and I maintained that position for quite some time because I don't want to impugn someone's character. Just because it looks bad doesn't mean it's bad. But your guys' work showed that there was emails between Bill Henman and the SEC ethics office that said to him, stop meeting with your partners. You are an ongoing profit-sharing partner. And the interesting point that you said, under the statute, which is 18 USC 208, which is a financial criminal conflict statute, it says to officers such as Bill Henman, it is a violation of the law if you allow even the appearance of impropriety. So in order, you could be guilty of the conflict statute if you allow it to appear like there's impropriety, even if there really isn't impropriety. And we learned from the emails that you all secured that Bill Henman, at a minimum, just from the SEC email account, met with his partners 3 times more after being told, if you meet with them, you're in violation of the law. So after you all discovered that, I came out and said, I'm a former federal prosecutor, special assistant United States attorney. A monkey could convict him of the statute. Doesn't mean any punishment should happen because we don't know how intentional it was. But again, it is a violation. And so I want to get to your referral, because all of this stuff that you guys have been fighting for, ultimately, you all made a referral. Can you explain that?
And I want to hone in on something. We talked about this briefly before the show started, and I should have then, but and you may know better as a former SAUSA, but my understanding is that you've got the criminal conflict of interest statute, and then you've also got these regulations that are there to try and protect that. And so the appearance of the conflict of interest, I had always understood to be in the regulations. So this is the participating that affects it. So that's the statute, because otherwise, if it were just the appearance, then it would be such a straightforward case, right? As it
Right.
is, you have to look otherwise at like the some other things. So again,
Right.
my understanding is the regulations are where that gray area is, because they're trying to prevent the appearance, but the conflict is, or the statute just says if there is the financial interest. So the referral to the IG outlines this. It outlines the communications that show the SEC ethics attorney saying, hey, you can't meet with these individuals. Here's what the restrictions are. He agrees to those. He meets with them anyway. And so that went over in May of 2022. Yes, I had to think about that timeline for a minute. As you say, 4 years, a lot of time has passed in that. And then we heard nothing. And I, you had Jason on in a couple months after that on this show. There were there was a lot of kind of press that happened saying there really ought to be an investigation, but we didn't know what was happening. We did along the way, however, again, as part of that response to the SEC filing or taking our FOIA filings and not fully responding, it went from we're requesting communications about certain topics to, okay, now we want your communications about our FOIA request because we don't think you're acting in good faith. And now we want communications about the Inspector General referral. So we asked the SEC. That was a way for us to gauge if anything was happening. And so lo and behold, at the beginning of this year, the SEC came back and said, well, will you let us off the hook for giving you communications about the IG investigation if we just promise you a final report? Because it is in the final stages. And of course, that was news to us that they had, in fact, taken it up and done a report. Nothing obligates an IG office to investigate a certain matter. Certainly not a referral from the public. Sometimes Congress can require one in statute or other ways. But so that was, great news, it seemed, right? That not only have they done one, but they're in the final stages. And what we understood, again, that referral consisted of both what we sent was the information about Henman, as well as information about Clayton and the suspicious circumstances of his employment move directly after filing the lawsuit in December of 2020.
Right. And listen, I want to remind everyone out there that before this lawsuit was filed, one of the most respected former SEC commissioners, Stanford law professor, Joseph Grunfest, had sent a letter who had actually helped Ethereum. So, another person who isn't a token, specific. He had helped the Ethereum founders with the SEC. He said, listen, if you file this lawsuit, first of all these people are leaving. Clayton's leaving, Berger's leaving, who's the director of enforcement. Henman's leaving, the trading markets guy's leaving. Everybody's leaving, and you're going to these places that Bitcoin and Ethereum are, good things for them. That looks bad. It's never been done in the history of the SEC. There's no reason to treat XRP different than Ethereum. And there's no urgency. XRP has been traded for 7.5 years. Like, there's no reason to file this lawsuit as you're walking out the door to take jobs that are good for Bitcoin and Ethereum. So you got people who could never be caught a conspiracy theorist saying the same stuff we're talking about. But you said something very interesting. You said the SEC said to you folks, hey, if you drop your request for the communications at the SEC about your referral for an investigation on the IG report, if we just give you the IG report when it's finished, will you drop your requests for those emails and communications? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Well, as a plaintiff's attorney who has sued multi-billion-dollar international corporations, that's when my antennas go up. Did you cut a deal with them and say, all right, we'll drop that if you give us the report, or what happened, Tristan?
Yeah, we said that's great. We'll take the report and the communications. Thank you very much.
There you go. Right. Touche, my friend. Touche.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a significant issue, right? And the IG ought to be able to explain to the public what happened. And so we weren't going to drop our lawsuit just to make life easier for some bureaucrats at the SEC's FOIA office. We said no. We moved forward. In fact, not long after that, we filed a lawsuit on an additional set of FOIA requests. That said, we knew that we would then be, there was kind of an unknown variable that we wouldn't know when the report was out. We wouldn't have the advantage of them proactively giving it to us when it was out. And so all year long, we were kind of waiting and watching and looking to see In July, we wrote another letter to the SEC IG saying, hey, it's been 5 months since it was represented to us that you authorized the SEC to tell us the report was in the final stages. What gives? And still no response. And as you will recall, a couple months ago, we started just, kind of banging on Congress's door too. We could have filed a new FOIA request earlier. We were hopeful to be able to get Congress to take an interest in this. And I think with the Clayton nomination as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, you will definitely see some. It may take a month or so, but you'll see some congressional focus, at least to a small extent, on this at the very least. But we had been waiting, so now finally to have that confirmation, we filed the new FOIA request. Again, now the cat's out of the bag. Everyone knows that this report was finished somewhere along the way, and the SEC should have, again, given the immense public interest in this, the SEC IG should have posted it publicly. They should have just announced, because this report impacts so many people, and they often won't for criminal type or very specific things. Often they'll say the privacy interests of the individuals involved, right? If we do an investigation into whether Joe Bob, pilfered $10 from the agency such and such account, right? Like, that's a matter for the inspector general to look at. They're not going to put all that out there for the world to see. But this is a highly significant case with a lot of public interest and that affects a lot of public stakeholders. So the IG, Deborah Jeffrey, should have released this. And the fact that she hadn't, I think, is definitely something for incoming President Trump to consider when he's considering whether to keep different inspector generals on or not.
Well, absolutely. And listen, you said public interest. I believe December 8th, Case for Consumers launched an ad wanting that report disclosed, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
and again,
you've got other entities out there saying, hey, we want to know what's the results of this report. And then I learned yesterday, the reason why I said that this interview that we had set up was so timely is that yesterday there was a Center Square piece that basically discussed that the report is finished and it's been issued. So my question to you is, since the Inspector General didn't issue the report to the public, which I agree with you should be done, especially if you're an independent, IG, who did she issue it to?
So all Inspector General products get issued to the agency head. So the concept of the Inspector General, if you'll allow me to be a nerd for a second, right, goes back to military. I think it was actually the French military, but the idea of having someone outside of the chain of command, so in the 1700s, who would go and examine the state of the military and then give a report to the commander in chief saying, hey, here are your weaknesses, here are the liabilities. So the inspector generals do that, but ultimately their work product goes to the head of the agency. They have no authority, the inspector general, to discipline anyone or anything else. They just make recommendations. But because they're significant, Congress clearly takes a huge interest in it, and often matters of public interest they'll also release to the public. But to answer your question, it went to the head of the SEC. That's who has it. That's where it was issued. And again, for them not to have also issued it publicly, I think was really a very large mistake on their part.
All right. So does Gary Gensler have the power as chairman of the SEC to order its release?
Absolutely. Now he may argue, I mean, again, if any, I don't mean to sound scornful. There are a lot of wonderful people in the federal government, but with that in mind, any bureaucrat can argue, right? Well, the privacy interests of people involved. So they certainly can try and hide behind that, but they also could issue a report and redact the name of the parties involved, right? And again, it's a clear case study on how the ethics process failed at the SEC. So Gary Gensler could absolutely do that, and he also should feel the pressure to do so.
Tristan, you want to know who else I believe should be demanding that this report be made public? Bill Henman, A16Z, where Bill Henman is a partner. One of the conflicts is the fact that he met with the partners at A16Z and their lawyers when they wrote the memo of giving ETH a regulatory clarity. Henman adopted a lot of that language in that memo that was provided to him by them. And then he becomes a partner later with the same people that helped write the memo that helped form the basis of the speech, giving ETH a free pass, right? All of that stuff looks bad. And so if I was an attorney, and I am, but if I was an attorney for Bill Hinman or A16Z, I'd say, hey, let's demand this, right? Let's get it to the public. Let's move on in this industry to the next chapter of regulatory clarity and transparency, because, you know, unless it's worse than obviously
that's the thing as an attorney, you know, you never want to ask the question you don't know the answer to, and the facts don't look good for him, right? And so any report, unless, you know, unless they're, you know, we have seen no indication of a move to prosecute Bill Hinman for violating the conflict of interest statute, right? He would know, I think, if that's the case. That said, even though he's probably in the clear from his perspective in terms of criminal liability, just the possibility, I mean, this is still going to make him look really bad, I think. And so, again, I would think he has every interest to try and just be perfectly happy that they're keeping it hidden.
Well, I mean, listen, here's the thing. I predicted what's going to happen. We're going to see if I was right. I actually predicted on live TV what Judge Torres was going to rule and how she was going to rule, and I was successful at that. I've said that a monkey could get a violation of the statute. Now, I've also predicted that the report has to say that there was a violation, but it can be watered down, and being watered down, it may be truthful. So I want to be fair to Bill or anyone else out there that, hey, you know, safeguards weren't in place. You know, Bill ignored the advice of the SEC ethics office, and he met with his partners, including on the very day that they were doing business with his partners on the K9 IPO and other things. But there's no intentional malfeasance, right? There's not this intention or quid pro quo where he did things with the specific intent that it was going to line his pockets or any of that kind of stuff, right? It's more of the typical revolving door where you're a regulator, you're working with these companies that you're regulating, you leave your government service, and now you're working at the very companies that you were just regulating. You know, whether you're the FDA chairman and you go work for Pfizer's board the next week, or Jay Clayton going from the SEC to One River, where they did $1 billion bet on Bitcoin and Ethereum just 2 months before the Ripple lawsuit. I mean, we could go into all the conflicts, and I'm tempted to, but I won't. But my point is, maybe when I say that if I was Hinman and A16Z that I would want it released, maybe I'm naive or optimistic that there wasn't this incredibly, you know, intentional malfeasance, or maybe I'm just hopeful that that's not the case. You know what I mean? But anyways.
I mean, one thing I will say is, I mean, that revolving door you described is so stereotypical, right? So I was a political science undergrad, right? And again, there's the number of books that have been written about that, right? You could stock an entire library with. But again, what makes, to me, Hinman's case so unique is that he was specifically told, is that he had a specific financial interest, and that he was told that, and he was told in such specifics, can't meet with folks or whatever else. And so often, so I was actually the chief ethics officer for an agency in the executive branch, and you know, and again, there's a lot of layers of which things can break down. Ethics, the ethics office doesn't have perfect insight into what everybody does. Again, a lot of this regulatory regime around this is about preventing appearances. That doesn't mean prosecutors would come in and find an actual violation of the statute, or even if there was, there'd be significant enough for them to shift their focus from, you know, whatever big crimes they're focusing on, right? But you know, but again, this is a situation where you've got a really specific guidance to Hinman, and he pretty clearly disregarded it. So I'm not saying prosecutors are going to come in, and again, whether or not, in my mind, whether it meets the definition of the criminal statute truly depends on what Simpson Thatcher's actual financial investments were, to an extent, right? Like how did they have actual Ethereum at, you know, did they hold it as a firm? How much were their contracts with clients that were promoting Ethereum? I mean, those are the kinds of things where it really matters. But, you know, but again, but that's so down in the weeds. Again, to any member of the public, if to have not just a nonprofit out there, but the IG, if come along and say, well, you were specifically told not to meet with people and you did anyway, I think that's going to look really bad to the public.
Well, yeah, let's just look at this. I mean, remember, Tristan, what I did is, we know that these commissioners and the chairman like Gensler, they'll never comment about a specific token or project, right? Gensler wouldn't even comment whether Ethereum was a security or not a security. And so all these years go by and there's no comment about specific tokens. But then Henman gives the speech that, Bitcoin, Ethereum are not securities. The first test, the first question that any ethics person, and you did this for a living, is going to be, whoa, that's different, right? They're speaking out. Yes, they give the disclosure of, oh, this is my personal opinion and not the opinion of the SEC, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, there's a reason ETH went up 400% that day or that week. You gave clarity to these tokens. So the first question is going to be, okay, Bill, do you own any Bitcoin or Ethereum? Because you just gave them this huge advantage. No. Okay. Does any of your family members own it? Do any of your partners? Oh, wait a minute. Your law firm is a member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. What's that? Oh, the objective of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance is the sole exclusive promotion of Ethereum as a blockchain. Well, Bill, you can't give that speech, right? That would be the advice. Now, someone else at the SEC might be able to give it, but you shouldn't give that speech because oh, wait a minute, your partners are pushing K9 and IPO for Ethereum mining equipment at the same time. No, Bill, you can't give the speech. That's what would happen. And so there's a reason when you look at the who got drafts of the speech, the only office that didn't get a draft of the speech was the ethics office. And so there's all of this suspicion that led to you guys, which gave this claim legitimacy. And then the fact that you make a referral and an inspector general says, yes, there's enough here to investigate. And so we need that final report. Do you have any, at the same time, listen, I'm someone who wants transparency. I want Gensler to release the meeting notes and correspondence that he had with Sam Bankman-Fried, right? He met twice with them. I think the public deserves to know what was discussed there. There's rumors that there was a potential agreement being made between FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and Gensler. I mean, let's just get all that stuff in the open. Is there any danger that Gensler would be like, hey, I don't release this one if you guys, protect me and don't release stuff? Does that stuff happen in DC? Or is that really me being a conspiracy theorist?
It happens in DC generally, for sure. Whether within an agency, I mean, that you're crossing then at that point, you're involving career officials who are different from political appointees, right, or presidential appointees. So I am less inclined to think that there's going to be some kind of quid pro quo in that way. I think the basic fact here that harms all this is, again, most federal employees are not fans of transparency, right? They're not looking to have their business, spewed out there in front of the public, even though they're working on the taxpayer's dime. And so that's the real force that just wears everything down. Is everyone, doesn't matter whether it's, and again, it doesn't need to be a quid pro quo. I can say, if I'm an incoming SEC commissioner, well, I don't know what John did that was wrong, but I don't know where people are going to criticize me too. So let's just keep it all under wraps, right? Everyone's good with that in those positions. And that's the real problem. People don't put a value on transparency, and the public doesn't make enough of a fuss about it.
If you had to, and you don't feel comfortable making a guess, don't, but if you had to make an educated guess of why this report hasn't been released so far, why the inspector general just didn't say, hey, I mean, to me, if you deemed it important enough to do the investigation, and you've seen such a big public interest in it, why not just do it? I mean, do you any idea why it's not being released?
In fairness to them, it is not the default. It is not the default to release investigations of specific individuals publicly. Programmatic audits, those get released publicly all the time, right? But investigations that deal with specific individuals, which, again, our understanding is this deals very directly with Bill Henman. So it's not the default. Again, as I've said, I think they should have. I think that this is, they have the prerogative. They have the they can, if they prefer, they can choose to treat it differently. I think this is one where they should have, and I think it was a big mistake not to. But But again, the standard across the board for these types of investigations is all secrecy.
Would Bill Henman know would he get a confidential copy of it, or know the results or conclusion by now, or no?
It's possible, depending on what an IG report. There's just different ways that it's approached, but there are times when, if someone is going to be criticized in a report, they'll get just at least an excerpt of the portion that relates to them so that they can give a response, because the agency, no IG wants to put out a product and then have some, a person who's identified as having committed a lot of wrongdoing come back and say, well, you missed this and this and this, and then the inspector general looks really silly. So he probably would have had a chance to respond, and usually that will be included with the report as like an appendix. We said all of this. Here's what the individual had to say. It goes to the agency. Now, it's a little unclear in this case because usually IGs are writing reports about current federal employees if they're doing an investigation. I will give a little credit to the inspector general's office that they even did any report at all, because so frequently when someone leaves the government, that's the end of the story. They don't go back after that. So this is significant enough that they did do one, as they should. And then you see that in cases like, the Department of Justice Inspector General still does report on Jim Comey even after he's left the FBI. Again, these big things of public interest. But like in those other reports, they should have released it.
Any pressure that you can give anymore? Let's say the report's not released. Paul Atkins starts day one. I mean, does your office intend to reach out, put any kind of request to have it released? Or you tell me, let's assume that it doesn't get released. We have a new SEC commissioners, the new chairman, Paul Atkins, is sworn in. What is the recourse to trying to get this report to the public?
So there's two things to keep in mind. One is, aside from any outreach like that, now that we have filed the FOIA request, they will have to produce it. They might redact it to some extent, but they will ultimately have to produce it. That's just a lengthy process. And our reasoning for pushing through the year was, given the public interest, we shouldn't have to go through that process. So it will ultimately come out in that way through the Freedom of Information Act request. A quicker way would be that, as you have Jay Clayton's nomination coming before the Senate Judiciary Committee, once power switches hands next year, right? So for instance, Senator Grassley, my former boss, I would not be surprised if, as chair of Senate Judiciary Committee, which he's not yet, but as when that time comes, that he would say, hey, we're going to need to know whether there's any information in here on Jay Clayton. And if there is, right, that they would get a copy of that. So similarly, a member in the House could request it and could choose to release it on their own. So,
well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I would have never had that foresight to think that, interesting, Jay Clayton's appointment to the Southern District of New York could be the mechanism that gets, the report out there, because part of the FOIA request was his community. You there?
I'm here. I'm sorry. Big storm here in Charleston, West Virginia.
All right. No. We're back. Listen, so we know, what I was saying is, we know the report's going to come out at some point. We don't know what level of redactions, if any, but you had requested, when I say you, Empower requested a lot of other emails that they've never addressed, emails that involved the Vitalik Buterin, the Joe Lubin, the founders of Ethereum, between Hinman and those folks, along with folks at A16Z. Is that all gone forever? Or is that something that will be revisited in the future?
Well, we actually our understanding, I mean, there are some outstanding requests, but what we understand is that what we have is the likely universe. Now, obviously, if someone destroyed records at the agency, I mean, that would be a criminal violation, among other things, right? So I'm not saying that happened. If it did, it's not going to get produced through FOIA. But what we have are assurances, representations from the agency, and in our litigation, they've told judges too, this is the extent of the universe. So one of the things that sticks out from our FOIA requests is that Jay Clayton didn't email anybody practically. So he's one of those individuals, and there are a handful of them in government, and I came across them when doing congressional investigations, who don't want to commit anything to writing. They know it can all come out through the transparent FOIA process, and so they don't email. And Jay Clayton, all of the requests we made on him all came back with no response at all. So you've got,
and guess who just got appointed in the new administration, right? No, I'm just saying is that maybe that's the smart play. But here's what I'm getting at. We know from the litigation and from Henman's deposition that on June 8th, it was either the 6th or the 8th, that Henman met with Vitalik Buterin. And we know that the speech changed. The draft before the meeting with Vitalik was different than the meeting after, related to, decentralization and Chinese miners and all that kind of stuff I'm not going to get into. But in order to set up that meeting, there had to be emails, right, from Henman at the SEC to Vitalik or his lawyer or someone else, and I've never seen those. And so
those are out there. Those are out there. If you go to our letter to Congress that I sent, it was right before the documentary came out, but there are emails setting up. So to just try and let me see if rather than rely on memory, but so Henman reached out to Joe Lubin first, if I'm remembering correctly, and asked him to set it up with Vitalik Buterin.
Okay, I was wrong. Those emails have been produced.
Yes, they have.
Okay, yeah. So as far as your the Empower's email request, to your knowledge, all of them have been complied with, and at the end of the day, now we're waiting for the IG report. Is that fair?
Generally, yes. There is still one other. We back in March of this year put in a new request on Henman and Clayton just based on new search terms. So all the documents that have come out of this last several years have kind of informed. Again, sometimes you can request a search just by give me all communications between John and Tristan. You can give me all things from Tristan that mention Deaton. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And so again, based on what we've learned over the years, we put in a new request this year just to see if, most of what would be produced would be duplicative of what I already had, but just see if there's anything out there we can find. And that is still ongoing. We've had one minor production from that. So far, it hasn't yielded anything significant, but that's the main outstanding thing.
Well, listen, we're going to wrap up, but I want to say why I believe it's important, but I'm more interested in yours, and the audience should be too, because at the end of the day, John Deaton had, I'm a crypto investor. Obviously, I'm amicus counsel in the Coinbase case, the Ripple case. I've been heavily involved. So there's always going to be some confirmation bias. I don't care who you are inherently. And the great thing about Empower is that there isn't this, the only confirmation bias is one for transparency in our government, which is a beautiful thing. And so I commend you for what you're doing. I believe this report needs to be released because we're trying to go from the bad days of crypto, lack of regulatory clarity, bad guys like SBF, and there's always going to be more bad guys, but you know what I'm getting at, to moving on to the new administration. President Trump is going to, he said, make America the crypto capital of the world. And we're moving forward into this era of clarity, legitimacy, hopefully tailored legislation. We'll know which, does the CFTC govern these tokens or how that's going to play out? All that seems to be. And one thing I believe this report needs to do is to say, okay, let's not have the same errors of the past as we move forward. And as a way of closing the books, that's why I believe, and for the truth to come out. But from your perspective, why is it important for this report to come out to the public?
I'd say three reasons. One, as you said, is just for the facts to come out, that there is enough public interest in this that just the public deserves to know. I like your second reason, the point that, as there is hopefully kind of a new chapter in crypto, President Trump has talked about that, President-elect Trump, and it is difficult. Again, if Jay Clayton's going to be over, if I'm Jay Clayton, back to your scenario, if I'm Jay Clayton, I'm a lot more like, yes, put that report out so people stop dragging me into it. Now,
Right.
I don't think it addresses him one way or the other. So even if it comes out and it doesn't mention him, I think the jury's still out, right? But,
Right.
but to that point, I think it would be, it's easier for the incoming administration to engender confidence in what they're doing and have people say, yeah, they really care about this stuff if they take that step. My third reason, and this is just as a broad matter, right? But trust in government is at an all-time low. Every public institution that you have has had their public opinion ratings plummet, and some of those we might not be going back on. I don't know. I don't know if confidence is ever going to rebuild. But this is an example where so many people who otherwise weren't really paying attention to the workings of government, they got harmed. And so I think that it would be significant to, again, as a step towards people being able to feel like there is some semblance of trust or confidence they can have in the government, to see what happened and how this went wrong. Because the number of people on any given topic that come at me with sometimes some kind of wild, what I would call conspiracy theories, right? But at the end of the day, all they see is people hiding things. And so I can't really blame them. I can say that, oh, that's not really how the process works. I don't think this, I don't think that. But people who are not in tune with the government, and why should we be, right? There's a whole entire country here. The government shouldn't be in the way of that. They shouldn't be impeding progress. But so this is an area where they can contribute to that trust. And it's really critical, because otherwise trust in public institutions will continue to decline. And that's really bad for America. So that, to me, is the bottom line. If nothing else, a lot of people who are not politicos, they're not in the ins and out, they're never going to read any other Inspector General report. But this is one that should be released, because a lot of people might read it and say, okay, there was at least a thorough looking out after this. People did care about it. If there was wrongdoing, at least the public can know about it now. That's important.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for your time. Is there a way, listen, you guys, do you accept donations for your funding at Empower? Do a plug. I want to give you an opportunity, because listen, like I said, you and Jason and Empower had a stamp of legitimacy, and you validated so many of us out there. When I tell you, listen, I was blackballed, man. Like, I would not be asked to go speak at a conference. I was asked to speak at conferences, and then I was told not to show up because I was out there, and they're calling me, the XRP attorney, even though I own more ETH. I was like, listen, I just want to get to the truth. And so when you came in and did what you did and Empower, you validated an entire ecosystem of people who care about a level playing field in this country. And so I want to give you an opportunity to make a plug or do whatever it can. And I encourage anyone out there, I'm going to, we need independent watchdog agencies such as yours, so go ahead, do that, Tristan.
Well, thank you. So I'll do two things. One, empoweroversight.org is our website, and it has a donate button on there. We are in the process, even though we have not had any crypto, we are in the process of adding a piece so that people could donate crypto if they wanted to. I think we, as a policy, would probably cash that immediately. So again, we would not have any immediate stock in any of the things. Another project that we have that's significant to us is that we've been focusing most of our attention on is at defendwhistleblowers.org. Because again, people from inside the government, that's the best source. FOIAs, as we've seen, is such a crapshoot. You're in litigation doing this. If there are people inside the government that know there's wrongdoing, we need to protect those folks. And so we're in the middle right now of a defamation lawsuit against a very prominent attorney who lied about a couple of IRS whistleblowers we represent. So defendwhistleblowers.org is really our place to not just encourage people to come forward, which we do, but to also say, if you're going to lie in the public sphere about these things, there should be consequences. So I hope people will consider supporting that effort.
No, I agree. Okay, listen, when we get the report, hopefully you'll consider coming back. We'll see what that report says. But listen, on behalf of the entire community, I want to thank you. I want to thank Jason Foster. I want to thank Empower. Great work. And have a great holiday and Happy New Year, my friend.
Thank you. You too, my friend. Take care.
All right, everybody out there, Happy New Year. Happy holidays. See you soon.